"Kiss me like you mean it," Evelyn whispered to her lover outside the mansion, pressing her lips against his in reckless defiance. "You taste like victory," she teased, never realizing her husband was inside, watching, recording, calculating. "Soon, all this will be ours," she promised him, blind to the storm she had just unleashed. Richard Whitmore wasn't the kind of man to shout or beg. He was the kind of man who built empires, and then burned them down around traitors. What he did next wasn't just revenge, it was annihilation. Viewers, be honest, if you caught your partner's betrayal on your own doorstep, would you forgive, or would you destroy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. She kissed her lover outside the house, her lipstick still fresh, her laugh careless, her hands pulling him closer, completely unaware that inside, behind the tall glass windows, her billionaire husband sat in silence, watching every second. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He only sipped his whiskey, eyes cold, already planning the one move that would shock her more than the kiss itself. The man pressed against her SUV wasn't her husband. Kyle Matthews smelled of sweat and cologne, a fitness trainer who carried the confidence of someone who knew he was wanted. Evelyn Dawson's laugh rang out, sharp and giddy, echoing off the polished stone driveway. She smoothed her silk dress, the kind her husband had paid for, and whispered breathlessly, "Richard's in New York. He'll never know." Kyle smirked, brushing a hand along her jaw. "Then he's a fool to leave you alone." Her reply came with another kiss, longer this time, hungry. It wasn't love, it was rebellion. And it wasn't the first. Inside, Richard Dawson leaned back in his Italian leather chair, the glow of a single lamp casting his features in half-shadow. The billionaire everyone respected for his composure and brilliance sat frozen, the whiskey glass heavy in his hand. From where he sat, he could see everything, the angle of his wife's body pressed to another man, the way her fingers lingered like she'd forgotten who owned the mansion she stood in front of. Richard didn't blink. His silence was more terrifying than rage. He remembered the first time he saw Evelyn, 10 years ago in a cramped diner, when she was just a waitress with tired eyes and a laugh that softened him. He had thought she loved his heart before his money. That belief had built their marriage. But tonight, it cracked. Richard's mind pulled him back further. His father, a stern lawyer, had once warned him, "Don't trust quickly, son. The moment you stop watching is the moment betrayal grows." Richard had ignored it once before. His first wife had proven the warning true, running off with his business partner. He swore it would never happen again. That was why he'd wired his entire estate with cameras. Insurance, not just against thieves, but against the people closest to him. And here it was, playing out live. Evelyn's muffled giggle floated inside through the glass. She tugged Kyle's hand toward the side gate. "Just a little longer. Soon it'll be just us." Richard's hand tightened on the glass. "Just us." The words carved themselves into his chest. He didn't move to stop her. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing he had seen. Not yet. Patience. That was his weapon. The man who built empires from the ground up had learned the value of timing. One misstep could cost millions, tonight, one misstep could cost everything. Outside, Evelyn's kiss deepened. Inside, Richard's silence thickened. The war hadn't started yet. But in Richard's eyes, the end of their marriage had already begun. Richard did not storm outside. He did not smash the glass or confront them. He stayed seated, his whiskey swirling in the dim light, letting the silence press against him like armor. A lesser man would have lost control, but Richard Dawson had built an empire by never acting before the timing was right. Tonight, timing was everything. He rose slowly from the chair, his steps deliberate across the marble floor. The sound of Evelyn's laughter outside still clung to the glass, and for a brief second his chest tightened, not from jealousy but from the bitter taste of déjà vu. His first wife's betrayal had been violent, an affair with his partner that gutted both his company and his trust. That night years ago, he'd vowed never again to let anger ruin him. Proof, not passion, would be his weapon. Daddy? A soft voice broke through the memory. From the hallway, Sophia, their 7-year-old daughter, rubbed her eyes, clutching her stuffed bear. Her innocence pierced him in ways Evelyn's kiss outside could not. Richard crouched, brushing her hair back gently. Go back to bed, sweetheart, he whispered. Is Mommy outside again? She asked. Her question landed like a stone in his chest. Again. Richard's eyes flickered, so it wasn't the first time Evelyn had left their daughter alone to chase shadows. His suspicions deepened. He kissed Sophia's forehead and carried her back upstairs, his face calm, but his thoughts burning. When he returned, Evelyn was gone, the driveway empty. Only the faint smell of Kyle's cologne lingered in the air. Richard walked past the front door and into his study, where 3 monitors glowed softly. He clicked a key, and the cameras he'd installed years ago filled the screens. He scrolled back and watched it again, the kiss, the laugh, the whispered promise of freedom. Proof was no longer an idea, it was a file saved under her name. A knock at the side door startled him. Madison, his younger sister, walked in unannounced, her stilettos clicking against the tile. She tossed her bag on the counter and raised a brow. Why's the house so quiet? Richard poured her a glass of wine without a word, setting it in front of her. She sipped, watching him. Something's wrong. You're too calm. He studied her carefully. Madison had never trusted Evelyn. Years earlier, she had caught Evelyn forging a receipt to make it look like she'd donated Richard's charity funds. She'd told him then, this woman isn't loyal, she's ambitious. He hadn't listened. She's cheating, isn't she? Madison finally said. Richard's jaw shifted, but his voice was steady. I'm not ready to answer that. Not yet. Madison leaned in. Then promise me one thing, Richard. Don't let her walk away clean. Richard met her gaze. The calm mask remained, but something colder stirred behind his eyes. Clean. He let the word linger. No, Madison. When I move, she'll regret every step she's taken. Outside, a car engine roared faintly into the night. Evelyn wasn't done. But neither was he. Richard waited until the sound of Evelyn's car disappeared into the Miami night before moving again. He turned off the monitors, poured another whiskey, and walked into the dining room. The silence of the house was suffocating, but it gave him clarity. His empire had been built on patience, on knowing when to hold his cards close. Tonight, the same rules applied, his wife just didn't know she was playing a game she could never win. Evelyn returned past midnight, perfume heavy and smile rehearsed. She kicked off her heels by the door, calling out, Richard. You still awake? He appeared from the shadows of the kitchen, glass in hand. Long girl's night? She froze for a second, just a second, but quickly forced a laugh. Yes. You know how Susan talks too much. She slid past him, heading for the stairs. Richard watched her go, every detail sinking into his mind. The faint smudge of lipstick wiped away too late. The glow in her eyes that wasn't meant for him. He said nothing, only added the lie to his collection. In her bedroom mirror, Evelyn stared at her reflection. She had married Richard because her mother always told her, marry a man who can give you what I never had. For years she played the perfect wife, hosting charity luncheons and smiling for society pages. But when the love faded, when Richard buried himself in boardrooms and deals, she told herself she deserved passion again. Kyle was never supposed to be more than a distraction, but somewhere along the line, she began whispering promises even she wasn't sure she meant. Her phone buzzed. Kyle's name lit up the screen. She hesitated, then answered. I told you not to call me this late. On the other end, Kyle's voice was low, insistent. I don't care. I want you. I'm tired of hiding. Tell him. Tonight. She pressed her hand over the phone, whispering fiercely, "Are you crazy? He's not stupid, Kyle. If I slip, he'll destroy me." What she didn't know was that just down the hall, Richard stood outside the door, listening. He heard enough, the urgency in Kyle's voice, the fear in Evelyn's whisper. Proof wasn't just on his cameras anymore. It was in her own trembling tone. The next morning, Evelyn walked into the kitchen, sunglasses covering her tired eyes. Richard sat at the head of the table with Sophia beside him, reading a book. His voice was calm when he spoke. "Evelyn, I moved some money into Sophia's trust this morning. Just paperwork. I thought you should know." Her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. For the first time, she looked rattled. "Why would you do that without telling me?" Richard smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "Because some things are safer when protected." The words landed heavier than she let on. She forced another laugh, too quick, too brittle. But deep inside, her pulse quickened. Something in his tone told her he wasn't blind anymore. And as she turned away, Richard's phone buzzed silently in his pocket. A motion alert from the hidden camera outside. Kyle had come back. Evelyn's lies were getting sharper, but so were Richard's instincts. That evening, she told him she had a late meeting with the charity board. He kissed her hand, smiled, and watched her leave. He didn't argue, didn't accuse, because he already knew where she was going. Richard slid into his private black sedan. His driver, Mark, glanced through the mirror. "Home, sir." "Not tonight," Richard said evenly. "Follow her." The car tailed Evelyn's Mercedes through the city until it stopped at a rooftop bar overlooking Biscayne Bay. From the shadows of his tinted window, Richard watched his wife step out, her silk dress hugging every curve he had once adored. Kyle was waiting, leaning against the railing, lit by neon glow. He kissed her hand like a conqueror claiming stolen ground. Richard stayed silent. He wasn't just watching them, he was studying them. Every touch, every laugh, every whisper. This was more than an affair. It was a plan. He could see it in the urgency of their faces. At the rooftop, Evelyn leaned in close to Kyle. "Be patient. He suspects nothing. When the time is right, I'll take my share, and then we're gone." Kyle pulled her against him. "I don't want his money, Evelyn. I want you." She laughed bitterly, a laugh Richard had heard 1,000 times at dinner parties when she pretended to admire him. "Don't be stupid, Kyle. Without his money, we'd have nothing. Do you want me to go back to living in an apartment with leaking pipes?" Kyle's silence was answer enough. Richard's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart, it was betrayal of design. Evelyn had never wanted him, she had wanted the life he built. The foreshadowing of his father's old words struck him again: the moment you stop watching is the moment betrayal grows. Richard remembered the time Evelyn begged him to put her name on his business accounts. He had refused, smiling gently, saying, "Love doesn't need signatures." She had kissed him that night with more fire than ever before, but now he understood why. His phone buzzed. Madison's text lit up the screen, still keeping calm. "Don't forget, proof without timing is wasted ammunition." Richard typed back only 2 words, "Almost ready." Inside, Evelyn's voice cut through the night air. "Soon, Kyle. Just one clean strike. I'll tell him I want out. He'll crumble, he always crumbles when I cry." Kyle kissed her, and in that moment Richard made his decision. There would be no confrontation, no shouting match. His revenge would be precise, brutal, and final. "Sir," Mark said carefully from the driver's seat. "Do you want me to stop this?" Richard's voice was ice. "No. Let her dig her grave. I'm the one who'll bury her." As Evelyn's laughter drifted across the rooftop, Richard leaned back in his seat, already planning the trap. One move, and the empire she thought she was stealing would collapse on her head. The morning sun cut through the Dawson estate, its rays glinting across marble floors and polished glass. Evelyn drifted into the kitchen in a silk robe, her hair freshly curled as if beauty could mask guilt. She busied herself with the coffee machine, humming a tune that was far too bright for someone who had crept in at dawn. Late night? Madison's voice snapped across the room. She stood by the counter, arms crossed, her eyes sharp. Richard's younger sister had always been direct, too direct for Evelyn's taste. Evelyn forced a laugh. Charity work never ends. You know how it is. Madison's gaze slid to the laundry basket by the door. She plucked out a towel, one marked with the logo of Kyle's gym. She held it up between two fingers. Funny. Since when do charity galas hand these out? Evelyn's eyes flickered, just for an instant, before she snatched the towel back. It's Richard's. He must have picked it up somewhere. Richard walked in then, his tie already in place, his expression calm as stone. I don't go to that gym, he said smoothly, kissing Sophia on the forehead as she munched her cereal. But I suppose it could have found its way here. His voice was mild, but his eyes lingered on Evelyn's trembling hand. Madison smirked. You've always been bad at covering your tracks, Evelyn. The tension cracked in the air, but Evelyn pasted on her brightest smile. Paranoia doesn't suit you, Madison. Maybe you should worry about your own life instead of mine. Richard sat down, flipping through the newspaper as though he hadn't heard. But inside, he was filing everything away. Madison's suspicion wasn't new, she had warned him years ago, after catching Evelyn altering receipts from a charity event to make it seem she had personally donated large sums. He had chosen to overlook it then, blinded by affection. Not anymore. Later that evening, Richard found himself replaying memories he had buried. The night he proposed to Evelyn, when she cried not because of the ring but because he promised her a future, with no more bills to worry about. He remembered how her first request as his wife wasn't a honeymoon destination, but the deed to the Miami mansion. Foreshadowing was everywhere, he had simply chosen not to see it. As the house settled into silence, Richard stepped into his study and pulled open a drawer. Inside lay a folder marked with Evelyn's name. Inside were photographs from the security cameras, printouts of her bank withdrawals, and a transcript from a private investigator he had hired weeks before. He had been watching long before last night's kiss. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Evelyn tapped lightly on the doorframe. Richard, are you coming to bed? He closed the folder, his expression unreadable. In a while. You go ahead. She lingered, searching his face for cracks. When she found none, she nodded and retreated. As soon as her footsteps faded, Richard whispered to himself, one more lie, Evelyn. Just one more, and I'll end it all. And almost on cue, his phone buzzed again. The motion camera outside had captured Kyle's car pulling into the street. The cafe terrace overlooked the ocean, sunlight glinting off glass railings. Evelyn sat opposite Richard in a cream dress, oversized sunglasses hiding her tired eyes. She stirred her cappuccino with unnecessary precision, the clink of the spoon a nervous rhythm. Richard's calm smile across the table only unsettled her further. Strange thing about lies, Richard said conversationally, folding the newspaper beside his plate. They start small, harmless even, until one day, they consume everything. Evelyn's hand froze mid-stir. She forced a laugh. Are we really having philosophy over brunch? He leaned forward, his voice even, almost kind. I've lived long enough to know people reveal themselves in what they hide, not in what they say. His eyes lingered on her face. Don't you think? The question felt heavier than casual conversation. Evelyn pressed her lips into a smile, though her pulse raced. You sound paranoid, Richard. Paranoid. The same word his first wife had thrown at him years ago when he confronted her late-night absences. He had believed her, blinded by love, only to walk into his own office and find her with his partner. That betrayal had cost him millions and nearly ended his career. He swore back then never to mistake composure for weakness. Evelyn raised her glass of orange juice as if to toast, covering her nerves with a smile. To a marriage with no secrets. Richard clinked his water glass against hers. No secrets, he repeated softly, but in his chest the words tasted like ash. His mind returned to the folder in his study, the bank transfers, the videos, the evidence stacked neatly like a loaded gun waiting to fire. He would not expose it yet. Let her believe her lies were working. That was the only way to make her fall harder when the truth hit. By the way, Evelyn said quickly, changing the subject. I've been thinking of redecorating the guest house. It could use a woman's touch. Richard arched a brow. The guest house? Who's the guest? She blinked, then chuckled nervously. I mean, for when friends visit. You know. Foreshadowing rippled in her slip, the very house she planned to use as a hideout with Kyle. Richard's silence in reply told her he noticed. She tucked her hair behind her ear and tried again. Maybe we should plan a trip soon. Somewhere far. Just us. He studied her for a long beat, then leaned back, his voice calm. Trips sound nice. But timing is everything, Evelyn. Move too fast, and even paradise turns to quicksand. Her stomach dropped. He was warning her. Or was he? The waiter arrived, breaking the moment. Evelyn forced herself to smile as their plates were set down. She reached for her fork, but her hand trembled slightly. Richard noticed. He always noticed. He sliced into his omelet with surgical precision, his tone casual as he said, "One day, Evelyn, I'll ask you something that demands the truth. When that day comes, choose your answer carefully." The fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. For a moment, the sound was louder than the ocean behind them. She swallowed hard, hiding her fear behind another empty smile. And at that exact moment, Richard's phone vibrated with a silent alert under the table. Another motion capture. This time, it wasn't the driveway, it was the guest house. The study was quiet except for the hum of Richard's laptop. Numbers glowed across the screen, millions of dollars, accounts scattered across trusts and shell companies, all moving with surgical precision. One by one, assets Evelyn thought she would inherit vanished into Sophia's name. Richard typed with steady hands, each keystroke a nail in the coffin of her imagined future. He remembered nights in his 20s when he'd been broke, sleeping in his car while trying to close real estate deals. He had clawed his way to the top, learning the art of protection. How to keep wealth fluid, hidden, untouchable. Those lessons were his survival then. Now, they were his weapon. Downstairs, Evelyn paced with her phone pressed to her ear. He doesn't suspect a thing, she whispered. Her voice trembled with excitement, though part of her still feared Richard's silence. It's just a matter of weeks, Kyle. Once the accounts are in my hands, we'll disappear. Kyle's laugh was low and impatient. You've been saying that for months. I'm tired of sneaking around. You think I enjoy this? She snapped back. You don't understand what it's like living in his shadow. He controls everything. If I make the wrong move, I lose it all. Kyle said nothing, and in the silence Evelyn felt the truth cut. He wasn't patient. He wanted her, but he also wanted her husband's empire. Richard watched her from the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows. He didn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. The tone was enough. He'd heard it before. His first wife, begging her lover for more patience, promising him riches once Richard was out of the way. Some betrayals repeated themselves like curses. This time, he wouldn't just walk away. This time, the revenge would be final. At breakfast the next morning, Evelyn slid into her seat across from him, smiling brightly. I was thinking, she said casually, maybe we should consolidate some of our accounts. Less paperwork that way. Richard sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving hers. Interesting suggestion. Though I've found spreading things out makes them harder to steal. The word hung in the air. Sophia giggled at her cereal, unaware of the storm brewing above her head. Evelyn's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, before she recovered. Later, she met Kyle at the guest house, the place she thought Richard never noticed. They stood by the window, whispering plans. Evelyn traced her finger along the glass. Soon this will be ours. Kyle frowned. And if he finds out? She smirked, her confidence brittle but dangerous. Richard? He's brilliant in business, but in love he's weak. All I have to do is cry, and he'll hand me everything. Outside, hidden cameras recorded every word. Inside the main house, Richard replayed the feed, his face unreadable. She thought tears could save her. She didn't realize she was playing against a man who had already erased her from his world. And as he closed the laptop, transferring the last account into Sophia's trust, Richard whispered to himself, "Cry all you want, Evelyn. You'll be crying in the ruins." The quiet suburb looked perfect from the outside, palms swaying, hedges trimmed, driveways lined with luxury cars. But secrets had a way of leaking through walls. Mrs. Holloway, the Dawsons' next-door neighbor, stood watering her roses when she saw Evelyn in the driveway again. Only this time, Evelyn wasn't alone. Kyle's hands lingered too long on her waist, his mouth brushing hers. The kiss was quick, but careless, like two people who believed no one was watching. Mrs. Holloway narrowed her eyes. Evelyn had always looked down on her at neighborhood events, bragging about Paris trips and jewelry. But arrogance had a way of making enemies. That evening, Mrs. Holloway paid Richard a visit, a covered dish in her hand as an excuse. "Thought you could use this," she said warmly. "You work too hard." Richard invited her in, offering his usual polite smile. He had known her for years, a woman who noticed everything yet rarely spoke unless it mattered. Tonight, her eyes carried weight. "Richard," she said softly, "I don't mean to stir trouble, but I saw something today." "Evelyn." "With a man. Not a relative." For a long moment, Richard didn't answer. He only studied her face, measuring the truth in her words. Then he exhaled slowly and poured her tea. "Thank you, Margaret. Timing is everything. Let me handle it." Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "Don't let her embarrass you further." "I won't," Richard said simply, his calm terrifying in its certainty. When she left, Richard sat alone in the kitchen. He didn't need her confirmation, his cameras, his instincts, his history with betrayal already told him enough. But her words sharpened the reality, Evelyn wasn't just a wandering heart. She was a woman flaunting betrayal, careless enough to let neighbors see. That arrogance would destroy her. Upstairs, Evelyn slipped into the bedroom later, humming as though nothing was wrong. "You're still awake?" she asked, dropping her purse. Richard folded his papers neatly. "I heard you've been making friends in the driveway." She stiffened, but forced a laugh. "Neighbors love to gossip. You know how it is." He studied her. "Yes. And sometimes gossip is the most honest voice in the room." She turned her back to change, but her hands trembled. She remembered her mother's words when she was a girl, "Don't get caught in lies. They ruin women faster than poverty." Evelyn had lived her life balancing those lies, but tonight she felt them wobble under her. Richard brushed past her, kissing Sophia goodnight before returning to his study. Alone, he stared at the monitors, replaying Mrs. Holloway's timing. Evelyn thought she was untouchable. She thought her beauty and tears could still blind him. But in Richard's mind, the neighbor's warning wasn't gossip, it was the bell tolling the countdown. Downstairs, his phone vibrated again. The guest house camera lit up. Kyle was inside this time. And Evelyn was on her way to join him. Richard closed the laptop slowly, his reflection sharp in the glass. He whispered to himself, let her walk into the trap. Tonight, the walls close in. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the kind of setting Evelyn once adored. Silver cutlery gleamed against crystal glasses, a table dressed as though nothing in their marriage was broken. She walked in wearing a black satin gown, lips painted bold red, carrying herself with the confidence of a woman convinced her lies still worked. Richard stood at the head of the table, calm as ever, pouring wine into her glass. "You look radiant tonight," he said softly. Evelyn smiled, sliding into her chair. "I thought we could use a little romance." "Romance," Richard repeated, his tone so smooth it unsettled her. He cut into his steak with perfect precision, never rushing. Evelyn's eyes darted to him, then to her plate, then back. His silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, deliberate. Midway through dessert, Richard set his fork down and reached for his phone. Without a word, he pressed a button, and the dining room filled with the sound of laughter, the kind Evelyn had thought was hidden. Her voice echoed, breathless, from the speakers, "Soon it'll be just us." Evelyn's glass shook in her hand. Where did you get that?" Richard leaned back, sipping his wine. "Do you remember what I said about lies? They grow. Cameras catch them, microphones record them, neighbors watch them. And wives forget that the man they think is blind is always 2 steps ahead." She forced a laugh, desperate. "It was nothing, Richard. A mistake. I was drunk." "Drunk?" he interrupted, his tone calm but razor sharp. "You were drunk for months. Drunk in the driveway. Drunk in the guest house. Drunk on the rooftop bar." Her lips parted but no words came out. He had named every place she thought was secret. He rose, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photographs. Her kiss in the driveway, her whispers in the guest house, her hand clutching Kyle's arm on the rooftop. Evidence piled in neat order, impossible to deny. Evelyn's breath caught. She tried to summon tears, the same weapon that had worked on Richard before. But tonight, his face was stone. "Richard, please, you don't understand," she whispered, tears pooling now not from strategy but from fear. "I love you." He leaned in close, his voice low, steady, final. "You love wealth. You love power. You never loved me. And now, Evelyn, you'll learn what it feels like when everything you worship is ripped away." Her heart pounded. For the first time, she realized Richard wasn't bluffing, wasn't wounded, he was planning her end. The silence stretched until Evelyn broke it, reaching across the table, whispering, "Don't do this to us." Richard stood, gathering the folder back into his hands. "There is no us anymore." And as he walked out, his phone buzzed with another alert. Kyle was approaching the house, uninvited. Richard smiled coldly to himself. Perfect timing. The doorbell chimed, slicing through the silence of the mansion. Evelyn froze, recognizing the rhythm of that ring, 2 short, 1 long. Kyle's signal. Her fork slipped against porcelain, scraping loud in the stillness. Richard's footsteps echoed deliberately as he moved toward the door. Evelyn's chest tightened. She whispered sharply, "Don't answer that." But Richard didn't look back. His hand gripped the bronze handle, and with a calmness that masked thunder, he opened the door. Kyle stood there, lean and cocky, his tie loosened, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Evelyn," he started, until his eyes shifted to Richard standing tall in the frame. The smirk faltered. I thought. "You thought you were safe," Richard interrupted, his voice low and sharp. "Come in." Kyle hesitated, but pride dragged him forward. He'd always hated Richard's wealth, envied the empire he built from his late father's estate. Kyle had once confessed to Evelyn that he deserved it more, that Richard had inherited everything while he had been left to claw through scraps. Evelyn, in her vanity, fed that bitterness, whispering promises of a future built on betrayal. Now, as Kyle stepped into the house, the air felt colder. Richard led him into the dining room where Evelyn sat pale, her hands shaking. "You two look nervous," Richard said evenly, pulling out a chair for Kyle. "Sit. Eat." Kyle forced a laugh, trying to reclaim ground. "Richard, this looks bad, but you've got it all wrong." Richard poured him wine, the glass clinking with precision. "Do I?" He slid the folder across the table, the same damning photographs Evelyn had seen minutes earlier. "These say otherwise." Kyle's face drained of color. He glanced at Evelyn, whose eyes pleaded silently, "Fix this." "I can explain," Kyle stammered. Richard leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "Do you know what betrayal tastes like? It's bitter, but it teaches discipline. Tonight, you'll both learn." A memory flickered in Richard's mind, his father's words at the reading of the will, "Son, never fear betrayal. Fear what you'll become if you let it go unpunished." Richard hadn't understood it then. But tonight, staring at the two people who tried to reduce him to a fool, he understood completely. Evelyn's voice cracked. "Richard, please, don't do this." He finally turned his gaze on her, eyes cold, unyielding. "You did this. Both of you." Then he tapped his phone again. Hidden speakers hummed to life. Kyle's voice filled the room, recorded from a night Evelyn thought was secret. "Once Richard's gone, the estate is ours. His daughter will adjust. Money fixes everything." Sophia's name, spoken like property, ripped the last thread of restraint inside Richard. Evelyn gasped. "Kyle! You said you'd never." But Kyle snapped, slamming his palm against the table. "You think I'll carry this alone? You begged me to take you away. You said you were done with him." The words exploded between them, each syllable a dagger. Richard didn't need to raise his voice. The chaos was eating them alive. He stood, gathering the recordings, the photos, the evidence that would soon leave the courtroom with nothing left of their lies. But revenge wasn't just legal, it was personal. He leaned close enough for both of them to hear the hiss of his breath. "You thought I was the fool in this story. You were wrong. I am the storm." And with that, he walked away, leaving them in the dining room, two traitors now turning on each other, unaware that the true punishment hadn't even begun. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the mansion the air still buzzed with unease. Kyle shifted in his chair, sweat dotting his forehead. Evelyn kept glancing at Richard, as if searching for some hidden trace of mercy. There was none. He stood with the calm posture of a man who had already decided every move in advance. "Richard," Evelyn finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "You can't ruin us like this. Think about your daughter, think about Sophia." The mention of his daughter's name only sharpened his resolve. Sophia, his reason for restraint, his late-night anchor when betrayal gnawed at him. He remembered tucking her in weeks ago when she whispered, "Daddy, why does Mommy come home so late? She smells like perfume that isn't hers." A child's innocent confusion had planted the seed of suspicion. Tonight, Richard was watering it with truth. Kyle tried to reclaim control. "Let's be men about this. You don't want this getting messy, do you?" Richard turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Messy?" His voice was soft, lethal. "Messy was you kissing my wife outside the house I built. Messy was whispering about how you'd take my estate once I was out of the way. Tell me, Kyle, how exactly were you planning to move me out of the way?" Kyle froze, caught. He thought those words had been safe, spoken in secrecy. But Richard's hidden cameras and recorders had caught every syllable. "You forget," Richard continued, pacing deliberately. "This house was designed by me. Every hallway, every corner. You thought you were playing chess against me, but you've only ever been moving pieces I allowed." Evelyn slammed her palm against the table. "Stop toying with us. What do you want from me, Richard?" Richard's face hardened. I don't want you. I want justice. He pulled a remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Instantly, the massive screen in the living room flickered to life. Evelyn's laughter, Kyle's whispers, their plans to siphon his accounts, to sell assets, to strip Sophia's inheritance, all projected with chilling clarity. And then came the worst, Evelyn mocking Richard's blind loyalty, saying, "He's too proud to ever see the knife in his back." The color drained from Evelyn's face. Kyle stammered, you wouldn't show anyone this." Richard's lips curved, not in humor but in retribution. "Tomorrow morning, every board member, every investor, every lawyer in this city will see this recording. And when I file for divorce, Evelyn, you'll leave with nothing. As for you, Kyle." He paused, letting silence coil like a whip. The memory of his father's lesson surged again: when they come for your empire, don't fight them with anger. Fight them with legacy. Richard's empire wasn't just money. It was reputation, respect, fear. And tonight, he would wield it all. "I've already stripped your company shares," Richard said flatly. "Every silent partner you thought you had, is mine now. By sunrise, your firm will be bankrupt. You won't just lose Evelyn, you'll lose every ounce of credibility. You'll be the man who tried to steal a billionaire's life and lost his own in the process." Kyle lurched to his feet, veins bulging. "You can't do this to me." Richard didn't flinch. "It's already done." The tension in the room snapped like a taut wire. Evelyn crumpled into her chair, sobbing, while Kyle stared at Richard with wild, broken eyes. The man who thought he was predator had been reduced to prey. And still, Richard wasn't finished. "You two thought betrayal was a weapon," Richard said, his voice quiet but scorching. "But betrayal in my house is a death sentence." He turned and walked toward the door, his shadow stretching across the floor. Behind him, Evelyn's pleas and Kyle's curses mingled into a cacophony of despair. Neither of them realized that Richard's lawyers already had the evidence, the divorce papers, the custody claim, all timed to detonate at dawn. For now, Richard left them stewing in the ruin of their own making. But the storm of brutal revenge he had orchestrated had only just begun. The courthouse was crowded, every bench filled with onlookers, journalists, and investors who had once spoken of Richard Whitmore as an untouchable name in the city. Today, they were here to watch what looked like his downfall. Evelyn, dressed in pale gray, leaned against Kyle, whispering nervously. Her diamond earrings were gone, pawned weeks ago for legal fees she thought would save her. Kyle sat stiff, his arrogance cracked into desperation. He had lost everything Richard promised he would lose: contracts, credibility, partners. Only this trial, and the hope of painting Richard as cruel, remained. When Richard entered, the room shifted. He didn't walk like a man under siege. He walked like a man delivering judgment. His daughter Sophia sat quietly with his sister in the back row, innocence framed by wide eyes, unaware she was witnessing the end of her mother's empire. The judge called order, and the attorneys prepared their opening. Evelyn's lawyer began first, painting her as a lonely wife who had been emotionally abandoned, seduced by Kyle's charm while Richard buried himself in wealth. Murmurs filled the room, some nodding in pity. Evelyn stole a glance at Richard, expecting him to flinch, but his gaze was steady, unblinking. She remembered a night 2 years earlier when Richard had told her, "If betrayal ever comes between us, I won't scream. I'll simply end it." She had laughed then, sipping champagne, believing him too gentle for war. That memory now stabbed her, because he wasn't laughing. When Richard's lawyer rose, silence gripped the air. A single button pressed, and the courtroom monitors lit up. Footage rolled. Evelyn in Kyle's arms outside the mansion, her voice cooing, "He's too blind to see us. Soon, it'll all be ours." Another clip followed, Kyle boasting, "We'll drain his accounts before he even knows what happened." The gasps around the courtroom sounded like thunder. Evelyn gripped the table, her knuckles white, while Kyle's face contorted with panic. "Your Honor," Richard's lawyer said firmly, "this isn't a story of loneliness. This is calculated betrayal. They didn't just cheat, they plotted to dismantle his estate, to rob his daughter of her inheritance." The judge's gavel cracked, demanding silence. Evelyn tried to rise, tears streaming. "Richard, please, stop this." But Richard stood slowly, his voice deep, deliberate, carrying across the hushed room. "No, Evelyn. You stopped this the day you kissed him on my doorstep, believing I was blind. You underestimated the man you married. And you," he turned his gaze on Kyle, "you thought you could gut me and wear my empire like a stolen coat. But I don't lose. I rebuild stronger, and I make sure traitors choke on the ashes of their schemes." Whispers surged. Investors who had once sided with Kyle now leaned forward, recognizing who truly commanded the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already forming. The judge declared the evidence irrefutable. Evelyn's alimony was stripped, Kyle's countersuit was laughed out of court, and full custody of Sophia was granted to Richard. Evelyn sobbed into her hands, the woman who once mocked her husband's devotion now reduced to begging. Kyle tried to lunge forward, shouting that Richard had set him up, but bailiffs restrained him, dragging him out as his shouts echoed like the cries of a man swallowed by his own ruin. As Richard left the courtroom, Sophia reached for his hand. He looked down at her, eyes softening only for her. "It's over, sweetheart," he whispered. "We're free now." Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters called his name. Richard paused only once, turning to the crowd, his voice clear and final, "Betrayal doesn't break me. It builds me. And to those who think they can steal what's mine, remember this day." Evelyn and Kyle's downfall wasn't whispered in shadows, it was immortalized in headlines, in court transcripts, in the memories of everyone who watched their empire burn. And Richard, the man they thought too blind to see betrayal, walked away untouchable, his revenge complete.